This conference will now be recorded.
Good evening. I wish to continue the Harwich Board of Selectmen's meeting for February 8th, 2021. We opened the meeting at 6 o'clock and then went into executive session in which we discussed collective bargaining issues with the Harwich Employees Association and also the Highway Maintenance Employees Association, if an open meeting would be detrimental effect to the town's bargaining position. Joe, our town administrator, provided us with a brief update. Discussions are ongoing. With that, we exited the executive meeting at about 6:15, recessed for a few minutes, and now we're back into reopening our by going back to open meeting. And just to be official, I'll take a roll call to open our meeting again, reopen it. Don?
I'm here.
Steve?
Here.
Ed?
Here.
And I'm here. So we'll move next in. I'll ask you, if you will, to join me in a pledge of allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. This isn't a Super Bowl, so we're not going to sing or anything, but we'll move next then to weekly briefings. And Joe and Megan will look at the COVID-19 update.
So, Mr. Chairman, I'd turn it right over to our Public Health Director, Megan Eldridge, for the latest on COVID-19 and all that it brings.
Good evening, Megan.
Hi, Larry. Thank you. Our cases still remain elevated. Right now, we have 512 total cases of COVID-19 in the town of Harwich since about a year ago. We are actively following 29 of those cases. So out of the 512, we have 29 cases that are still positive within the town, not including Wingate. Wingate does still have positives. Their numbers seem to be decreasing there, so that's also a good thing. We remain in the red. We have a positivity rate of 5.45%. And again, that's based off of how many tests are done for Harwich residents in a 2-week period. The last 2 weeks, we had 1,266 tests and 69 of those were positive, giving us a positivity rate of 5.45. That is going down. So over the last few weeks, we've been trending downward with our positivity rate. If we see less than 5% next week, we may get out of the red and get into the yellow. Our case count, however, is still very high, but you do need both a case count of less than 25 as well as a positivity rate of less than 5 to get out of the red. We have a case count right now of 60. We had 60 cases over the course of 2 weeks. And that's fairly high, but it is less than it was last week. So again, we are trending in the right direction. It doesn't mean too much to go from red to yellow just in 1 week, but if after a couple of weeks in the yellow, we may be able to go from phase 3, step 1 to phase 3, step 2. There's a little bit of a occupancy difference and a little bit of activities that can take place if you are able to go into that other category. We did lift from the temporary occupancy today. Governor Baker lifted that 25% cap for most businesses, gyms, restaurants, offices. They are now, we're all at 40% instead of 25%. So that is great news for most businesses to be able to operate at a higher capacity. Restaurants still need to pay attention to the 90-minute limit people have to sit at a table. And they, again, are at a 40% capacity. Prior to this occupancy temporary occupancy order, there wasn't a percentage on restaurants, but now there is. So everyone should pay attention to their occupancy numbers for seating. It's pretty cold outside, so we are looking at your indoor seating and seeing that you're at 40% and making sure all the tables are 6 feet apart or have partitions. Testing is still available through Cape Cod Healthcare and Outer Cape Health. They are usually getting a same-day appointment if you are looking to get tested, whether you're symptomatic or asymptomatic. And the test results seem to be turning around in about a day and a half. It's pretty good timing if you're wondering if you have COVID, if you're symptomatic or non-symptomatic. So those are great options, and most of them are drive-through testing options. They have moved testing from the Cape Cod Melody tent, and now they're doing it again over at Cape Cod Hospital outside, but it isn't at the Melody tent anymore because now we have moved that to be a vaccination site. So going on to vaccine, we're in phase 2 still. Phase 1 people are still eligible to get vaccines, but now we've just started the first priority group of phase 2, and that is people age 75 and older. Barnstable County is having 2 clinics this week, one on the 10th at the Melody tent and one on the 12th in Eastham at the Little Creek National Seashore area in Eastham. Registration for these clinics opens tomorrow morning at 9. We do anticipate them to fill up very, very quickly. The registration has to be done through an online system, just like registration for any vaccine clinic needs to be done online. The mass.gov website will guide you to how to find a location and sign up for a clinic. But if you want to bypass all of that, you can go to maimmunizations.org. That's the link that you are directed to from within mass.gov. So if you go directly to maimmunizations.org, you can search for clinics within a 10-mile, 25-mile, or 50-mile-an-hour range from your zip code. And all the sites will show up if there's vaccine available. The Melody tent is going to have over 1,300 shots available on the 10th. If you're unable to sign up for yourself, if you don't have internet access, the mass.gov number 211, if you call that on your phone, 211, you'll get a live person and they'll be able to walk you through setting up an appointment. They'll be able to log on for you and secure an appointment if there are any available. And again, that number is 211. You can also call the county hotline. Calling these places doesn't give you a separate pool of appointments. They log on just like anybody would from their home computer and get the same appointments that are available to everyone. So this is an option if you have no way of securing your own appointment. It will take longer than being able to do it yourself. So if you have any way to get a friend or family member or coworker or someone that you know that can log on to the computer for you while you're on the phone with them and give them your information, that will be the fastest and most efficient way to get an appointment for these Cape Cod clinics, because they do fill up very fast. The other regional clinics, the ones at either Fenway Park or Gillette Stadium, there are appointments available within the next week or even 2 weeks. You can sign up, and if you can wait and if you can travel, those are widely available and not as sought after because they're a little farther away. But if you can't use a computer or don't have a computer, you can use the 211 system to have someone help you secure an appointment at one of these other mass sites. We do believe we're going to have bigger clinics like this with 1,000 or more doses week to week. So more availability should be coming about on the Cape. Phase 1 people are finishing up, so the vaccine is more available to these phase 2 people. So we're getting the same amount of vaccine every week, but we have fewer people to give it to because phase 1 is finishing up. So we should be able to maintain 1,000 to 1,500 doses in the county clinics week to week. And they're hoping to continue with a Hyannis site, a Falmouth site, and one on the Outer Cape to try to spread things out so people who live in different areas aren't driving quite as far. Each one may not be open each week, but they are planning on doing at least one clinic a week in at least one of these places. Phase 2, we'll go much slower than phase 1 did. In phase 1, we were in and out within a month, but phase 2, we're looking at a several month stretch. We haven't even begun to think about when second group in phase 2 will be eligible. So we're still working on the 75 and older population. The Council on Aging has been very helpful for people that want to know what's going on with the vaccine. You're able to contact the Council on Aging if you're homebound to make sure that they're aware of your status. Homebound can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. But as far as getting a vaccine, our VNA has agreed to serve homebound residents, but they are taking the strict definition of homebound, which means you're unable to leave your house unless it's within a medical transport. So many people who are homebound for reasons where they're not comfortable going out in public, or it's difficult to go out in public, but it's going to be the most efficient way to get a vaccine if you are able to get into a car and drive to a drive-through clinic. The homebound will be screened, and it will be able to give vaccines to those who are truly unable to leave the house. And if you are in that category, I encourage you to call the Council on Aging and make sure you are on a list within their phone system so we can reach out to you when the time comes to do homebound. One other thing we do have, Outer Cape Health is scheduling clinics out at Pine Oaks Village for our senior housing. That will happen in the coming weeks. We've been working with Outer Cape Health, and Sue Giselle, our town nurse, has been working with the Pine Oaks Village manager to make sure we get all those folks vaccinated on site as well. So those are pretty exciting things to show that vaccine is coming and we are able to start getting vaccine out to our most vulnerable populations. So that's what I have.
Thank you, Megan. Detailed report as usual. Comments or questions? I guess I've been trying a few times to get on the vaccines, but doesn't work yet. I'll try tomorrow, see what happens.
Yeah, unless you want to travel over the bridge, it's tough to find one on the Cape.
Let's not go crazy, Megan. I'm not. Travel over the bridge, come on.
Is that the fast river bridge, Larry?
Yeah, I don't even do that. Joe, do you wish to move directly to Cindy? Or do you have
Yes,
more
please.
comments?
Turn it right over to Executive Director of the Chamber of Commerce.
Good evening, everyone. I'm going to keep this really quick in lieu of the full agenda for tonight, but just a couple of things. I'm working on a new initiative for marketing our restaurants, hotels, and the retail of Harwich. So I'm going to unveil that next week to all of you. Some fun stuff to get people interacting and just bring some more fun life to Harwich. And then in light of that, just a reminder that this is another great time coming up this week. There's a special holiday, just in case everyone didn't know, the end of the week is, or actually next Sunday is Valentine's Day. So many of our restaurants have special menus for takeout or dine in. And then the shops, you can shop in person or online for that special Valentine of any age, fur baby, child, whatever. So just wanted to throw that out to remind everyone, another way to support our small businesses. And then next week I'll share the new initiative we have.
Thank you, Cindy.
And that's all.
I have remembered Valentine's Day, by the way. Haven't done anything yet, but I remembered it.
Just keeping you on your toes there, Larry.
Thank you. Any comments for Cindy? Questions? If not, we'll move to next is public comments. Do we have anyone? I know we have a couple questions or people later on. One was traffic and one was wastewater. But Joe, you know of anyone that's called in for this public?
None that I'm aware of, Mr. Chairman.
Let's move then to annual committee presentations. And the first on the agenda is the planning board. And I see Duncan, you're ready and ready to go, I hope.
Ready to go when you are.
Go ahead.
So I'm assuming that you all have received my report. Would you like me to read it in or field questions?
You don't need to. You can give us the high points and figure that we can send the packet. So I know I've read it. I'm sure we all have, and it'll be there for the public as well.
All right. Well, the high points are obviously we had a change up, like every board did in the town, thanks to COVID-19. We had some issues with some members getting online at the beginning, and a kind of difficulty in coming to speed with how to proceed with meetings. That, however, was handled, I think pretty effectively, and I think it was also mitigated by the fact that we had about a 15% drop in the applications from 2019. So instead of having 50 new applications, we had 34 submitted. The highlights of the applications were there were 8 approval not required, 1 approval of a modification for a definitive subdivision, 10 use special permits, 6 site plan reviews, 6 site plan reviews with special permits, 2 waivers of site plans, and 5 requests. As you'll recall from town meeting that we had 2 specific zoning amendments, one which was on the West Harwich Special District. The second one was on the multifamily use special permit. To the best of my knowledge, we are all in the process of redoing the ethics state test. Everybody's been sworn in. We're not having difficulties anymore with people signing on, so our attendance has been actually quite good. And we've actually had some pretty large meetings with impact for those applications where there's some sort of civic interest. So I would say we're doing pretty well. So I'd be happy to take any questions.
Are there questions for Duncan?
Hey, Don.
Yes. Hi, Duncan. Thank you and all your board for all the incredible work you've done this past year. That being said, I mean, you were clear about what you're doing in the DCPC, but I keep getting questions from the public. And if you could give the Cliff Notes version of what it is that multifamily zoning changed, I'd appreciate it, because there's still people out there thinking that we're trying to cram apartment buildings in East Harwich or something.
Yeah, actually, no, it's I think Elaine or Charlene could probably give the best summary statement, but what it was is essentially a way to streamline the process for permitting multifamily. That's all. So it's in the past, it's been a very cumbersome process. This was intended to make it possible for people to turn a barn unit into something that could be, usable for multifamily. That's all.
Thank you. That's pretty much all I thought it was. But again, after you get a certain level of complexity as an explanation, it starts becoming so daunting that you really can't understand it. Thank you. Most of the time, people don't understand that they didn't used to have the ability to develop, the garage next to their house into housing. And this just created some guidelines for that, so that there was a path.
Right. It's to make it easier for people who want to do it. That's all.
Thank you again.
That's a nice, that's a good explanation. I appreciate it. How about West Harwich? Is any activity going on there since the Cape Cod Commission and then a town meeting follow-up?
Well, the interesting thing is we're now working with the Cape Cod Commission on design guidelines for, it's actually going to be, they're volunteering, I should be careful about how that, they've offered to help us out with illustrating and circulating guidelines for historic and new building. And we're using as a template, we've drawn on 13 communities in the Commonwealth that have done similar things. We're culling the best language to produce something that's not, a big thick document. It's actually, we're looking to do a one sheet, 2 sides, that's it. So here's what we're looking for very simple declarative sentences for dealing with a historic building. And here, if you've got an empty space, an infill lot, this is what we're looking at for that. And there will be simple line drawings for people to understand, setbacks. How does this what do we mean by setback? What do we mean by massing? What do we mean by, gable lines, that kind of thing. So it should be, we just had the last meeting on that. I would say, I think it was on the 2nd of February. I think it was the 2nd. And so our next meeting tomorrow night, we have some material for the board to review. So, we'll have something to the planning board, to the Board of Selectmen for this new language, the design guidelines, hopefully within a few weeks.
Yeah. Thank you, Duncan. Other comments or questions? Thanks again for your report. Nicely done.
Thank you for the support of the Board of Selectmen. Anything that we can do, again, to support your work, just let us know.
Okay, we'll move on next to, lost my agenda.
Real estate and open space.
Real estate and open space.
Good evening, Mr. Chair. I will follow Duncan's lead and not read our whole report because you all have a copy. Again, our attendance has improved. That's one of the tiny benefits from the virtual meetings, because sometimes folks weren't able to be physically present. But with the virtual capability, our attendance has improved, although it's always been very high. Very few have never missed meetings. Most of our conflict of interest things have been done and submitted to me. I'm still waiting on a couple, but they're working on them. All our agendas and meetings have been filed and posted as required. Our committee clerk, Carol Porter, does a wonderful job with our minutes, and she's right on them, and there's no time wasted posting or filing. We continue to make recommendations about housing and properties that are suitable for housing development. So we try to attend the Affordable Housing Trust meetings when possible. We also work with the Housing Committee. We continue to have a very good relationship with the Conservation Agent, Amy Usowski, and the Conservation Commission. And we also work with the Water Department. We're actually working, currently not working with, but kind of advising and offering support to the Water Department for something they're working on currently. We have one request for CPA funds that we've worked on, which is being co-sponsored with Harwich Conservation Trust. We continue to look at properties. Folks have come to us with the desire to buy some town property. And we also have some property owners who are looking to sell their property to the town. Those things have kind of been put on hold for a while until there's a little more access to property, and the virtual things are a little easier to do. Other than that, I'd like to thank Mr. Howell, our liaison. He's always good for some help and some information. Charlene Greenlaw has been great as planner, and I'm sorry to see her go. And we also work with Michael Lack at Harwich Conservation Trust, who's also gives us a lot of information and is a great help to us. So that for me, unless someone has some questions or comments.
Thank you, Elaine. Questions or comments for Elaine? Don?
Not to prolong the meeting, but I appreciate all of Elaine's efforts. It's no secret that I have strong interest in historic preservation, but also in housing and open space, which to some seem to be at odds with each other. But Elaine's always there at the trust meetings. I mean, she's a stalwart, and she's doing a terrific job running that committee.
I just also wanted to reiterate in support of what Elaine said, we're going to really miss Charlene. And that was the one thing I was saying. We look forward to working with you on replacing her at your convenience.
Yeah, I agree. Elaine said you've done a fantastic job, and there's so much goes through your committee. People don't always realize that things, how many things get funneled through your committee first before it goes elsewhere. So,
Right,
nice
and
job.
you know, we do take the responsibility very seriously, and we do consider these properties. We walk the sites, we take pictures, we talk to people. So we do take the responsibility, and it's a privilege to be able to do this and to work with you all on the Board of Selectmen. Thank you.
Thank you, Elaine. Other comments or questions? Thanks again. And Joel, if it's okay with you, we'll go next to Recreation and Youth Commission. And I see John Mahan. Are you the going to carry this load for us?
Good evening, Mr. Chair. Yes, I am. Thank you very much. Hope everybody's doing well. We have a full commission, thankfully. We have no attendance issues, although COVID, like everybody else, has had a major impact on how we do our meetings, but attendance is fine. And as I mentioned, COVID has had a huge impact on what we've been able to offer for programs and whatnot, but that's the nature of the beast, and it is what it is. The good news is that the summer season ended up being very successful with Megan's help and the hiring of the COVID monitors. There were no major issues whatsoever to report, so that's great news. And it was a very successful beach season. Not much else to report on programs because there weren't any offered. I can update you on a few of our outstanding projects. Highway Department continues to construct new lifeguard stands for us. The money was allotted, and they are doing them when they have the time, so that they are working on that. Pleasant Road Beach parking lot was paved in the fall, looks fantastic. So that'll be ready for next season. We continue to work, and I want to special thanks to Joe and Griffin as they walk us through the new RFP procurement process. So we're continuing to work with them on White House Field for the lights, the scoreboard, and the safety netting, as well as the lighting at Brooks Park and the bathroom at Sand Pond, all of which projects have been approved, thankfully, by the taxpayers through CPC funds. As always, like to thank the taxpayers for their continued support. I mean, we have great facilities in this town, and none of that could be possible without the taxpayers. And again, my annual kudos to the Highway Department. I mean, between the fields, the parks, and the beaches, I think we have some of the best facilities on the Cape. So that's my report, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, John. Any questions or comments for John? John, this is one that probably, I know you have no control over, but the Cape Cod Baseball League is what's your guess? I see even Major League may be backing off their spring a bit. You think?
Last time I talked to Ben Layton, who's the general manager of the Mariners, their plan was, and that was as of a month ago, was still full steam ahead, subject to change at any time, but they are planning on trying to get back to normal.
Good.
Larry?
Ed, yes.
It's Don.
Oh, Don, I'm sorry. Well,
You'd be disappointed if I didn't say something. Thanks, John, for everything you do also. But just a quick process thought, because after Carolyn came in to talk about the facilities committee a month ago, we had a discussion, and I'll talk with you more offline, but the process for sending a representative to the facilities committee from Rec and Youth still has to go through the selectmen. You're nominating and somebody has to be confirmed. So just as a heads up, it hadn't been a problem for years because you've always sent the same person for years, but Lee is now departed. So I just thought I'd at least mention that to you as a matter of process.
Yeah, if you want to touch base, Don, also, we have somebody in mind so we can get that process going.
Sure.
Thank you.
other questions or comments for John? Thanks for all you do, John. So
Thank you very much. Have a nice night.
Joe, I don't think George is on yet.
No, I believe he was going to join us closer to 7:30. I would recommend if the board is still willing to go to your consent agenda.
Let's move ahead and we'll come back to this when George is joined us. Steve, would you feel comfortable?
Yeah, sure. Consent agenda. A, vote to approve the appointment of Margot Fenn to the Real Estate and Open Space Committee, term to expire June 30, 2022. B, vote to approve the appointment of Ernest Crabtree to the Conservation Commission, term to expire June 30, 2023. And C, vote to approve a Caleb Chase request in the amount of $717.38.
Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion. I would only comment it's very nice to have Megan or Margot Fenn back on the committee. She was there in the real estate and open space for quite a few years, and then unfortunately left. Now she's back, and also very pleased that Ernest Crabtree is coming. Is continuing his Conservation Commission position. Other comments? If not, I'll take a roll call. Don?
Aye.
Ed? Yeah, it looks like you're trying to say something. We'll come back to you. I'll go with Steve.
Aye.
And I'm an aye. Ed, are you online yet? Well, Joe, we'll take that. Right, there's George. We'll take that as a 3. I don't know what we call it.
3-0. Yep.
3-0 vote.
Get Ed later.
And
We'll get that
Mr. Chairman, as you've said, with the timing of Hollywood, Mr. Hoyfelder joins us right on time. We were doing a little song and dance there, George, but Mr. Chairman, if you want to go back to item 7 on the agenda, which is the public presentation.
I would, and I would turn it over to you then to start this.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I know Brian Dudley's been with us since the beginning of the meeting, and want to thank both Brian and George for taking time out of their schedules to join us this evening. And Mr. Chairman, as you know, through your initiative and for the members of the board, As I've talked many times, the staff that you have working on all matters of wastewater, what I refer to as the group of four, which would be our wastewater superintendent, our town engineer, finance director, and myself as administrator, continuing to get into topics and discussions that help us as a group come to a better understanding of the various issues that are confronting the town as it relates to wastewater in this particular instance, and to really just help us get a better understanding of what's out there, and to then have that come back to the board so that we can give information to the board that helps you all make informed decisions. And Mr. Chairman, if I may, before we get into the presentations by Mr. Hoyfelder and Dudley, I think it's useful to take a step back for a moment and sort of just lay out where we're at as a study group, meaning the group of us that meet regularly, no less than every Monday, to dive into whatever issues are coming up for wastewater. As you may recall, at your meeting on December 8th, I had talked about the various elements and components that were pressing on wastewater. And these are topics that we've bandied about a bit and will continue to get into in greater detail as the board warrants, either through town meeting or future town meetings. But as I've talked with that group that I mentioned, a few observations come to mind. And first, really that we're talking about several different categories, if you will, of information when it impacts upon a project of the size of the wastewater projects that we're talking about. And I'll have more information as we go forward, Mr. Chairman. As you recall, there's now a standing agenda item on wastewater that will be coming up under old business. However, this evening, given that we had a chance to have Mr. Hoyfelder and Mr. Dudley talk about their respective areas of expertise as it relates to wastewater and innovative technologies, we opted to have this week's discussion as a presentation for the board and for staff and through, by extension, the general public. But as we get into the weekly discussions of all matters wastewater, I've found that it's helpful for me to categorize them, for lack of a better word. And so we're going to be talking over the coming weeks about items of an administrative matter. And what I mean by that is, what is it that the town needs to do from an administrative standpoint to get something done or to come to conclusions. Now, there's nothing pressing immediately that comes under the administrative headline. The next headline, however, is financing, and that's obvious from its utterance. And that's where we'd be continue to rely upon our finance director, who will be relying upon bond counsel, financial advisors, and others as we tackle the ongoing issue of financing for current projects and for future projects. The next category is governance, and to me, that's one that we really need to redirect focus on. For me, governance is really something that talks about an internal or within Harwich discussion. Mr. Chairman, as you've talked before, and we've discussed the Mass Estuaries Program, or the MEP, we know that there's components in there that use the phrase build out. And so for me, as I'm trying to learn all these new terms and really bring myself up to speed, I understand build out as it's related in the MEP documents to be locally really talking about zoning and using zoning for the control of growth in the community. And so, that's going to become a bigger issue and topic on itself. But I think as we understand it to be a governance issue and something that needs to be discussed within the board, by the board, and many boards that relate back to the selectmen. Then beyond that, we have items of a regulatory nature, and that's something I will always defer to the wastewater superintendent and certainly the town engineer for their understanding of that. And then in some instances, as it relates tonight, we may call upon Mr. Dudley, Mr. Hoyfelder, or others that can give us more information on what's pending on regulatory matters. And last, but by no means least, is what I think is a headline for the topic tonight, and the headline topic that I have the least knowledge and experience in. So we'll be very glad to stop talking in a moment and hand it over to the experts. But that is when we have discussions of a technical nature. And so when I said earlier, Mr. Chairman and members of the board, about administrative and all the other items, there is one pledge that I make to the board and by extension to the general public. And that is, as we get into certainly the technical discussions that we'll get into tonight and beyond, is to make sure that I'm translating as much as I can. I say that because when you and I, Mr. Chairman, had a conversation about IA technology, I made the comment to the group earlier today, and it's the truth. You may recall a year ago that we were meeting in Yarmouth right before meetings like that couldn't happen because of COVID. And it was meant to be the Tri-Town or the Dennis Harwich Yarmouth board's meeting. And I was asked a question, and quite frankly, I didn't know my II from my IA. And now I do, and that's just from years of talking about that. And so when I hear a phrase like inflow infiltration, I hope I said that right or close to it, versus innovative alternatives, as we'll talk about tonight, I'm always going to bear in mind that the general public is probably in the same headspace that I am. And that is, there's a lot of acronyms, there's a lot of technical words. And so as we get into these topics going forward, staff and I will endeavor to make sure that we're translating for the general public so that we can all understand. So Mr. Chairman, with all that, I would turn it back to you if you'd like to recognize Mr. Dudley and Mr. Hoyfeld and set up what you expect for your expectations of the presentation tonight.
I would, but Joe, before I do that, we're taking this for granted, but could you just identify your group of four or gang that?
Yeah, I try not to say gang of four, but that's what we are. Again, it's the wastewater superintendent, Dan Pelletier. It's the town engineer, Griffin Ryder. It's our finance director, Carol Capola, and myself as your town administrator. And so we've been meeting for almost half a year now on a regular basis, no less than weekly, to get into substantive discussions. On a side note, it's been incredibly helpful for me to be able to pick Dan Pelletier's brain or Griffin Ryder's brain on what they know about wastewater and engineering, and the same with Carol. And so that those conversations lead to conversations like the presentation we're going to have tonight, and I think that's going to be helpful. Okay,
thank you. We'll move on then to, we've invited and very happy to have George Hofelder here. He's, George, don't shoot me for overstating this, but George has become a national expert on IA systems and actually all things septic and in some ways wastewater. So his expertise is well known. We've asked him to give us a state of the art of IA systems, the good, the bad, the ugly. And then we've invited Brian Dudley, our DEP, Mass DEP person on the Cape, to then continue that discussion on what the regulatory implications are, some discussion about potential operations of them and costing, and we'll go from there. I would ask that we'll have these presentations. Certainly willing to take some questions at the end. This is meant more of a presentation tonight. I think as Joel's implied, we're scheduling these weekly. So we'll come back to this probably over and over again as we move forward, looking at our CWMP and our plans. So this is, in some way, I'm looking at this as the initial shot to help us update us on some technical aspects, regulatory aspects, and then move on. So with that, George, I will turn it over to you, and thanks again.
Okay, thank you for having me. Do you hear me okay now?
We can.
Okay, great. So I've been asked to give sort of an update of the state of the art, as you said. And these are kind of exciting times to be looking at innovative alternative on-site systems, decentralized water and wastewater in general, because there are some large projects that are plowing the field before us. But I do want to draw a slight distinction between what's been done or what is being done nationally in two rather large projects and how that affects what we take from them as we move into the area of Cape Cod and the MEP studies. Two large projects. The largest one would probably be the Bay Restoration down in the Chesapeake, as well as some of the work that's being done in New York, Suffolk County, where they're installing a large number of innovative alternative septic systems and are engaging in a process of identifying the best ones there, best available technology, or BATs. How that fits in with what we're doing here on Barnstable County, I want to draw a distinction right off the bat. In Barnstable County, Cape Cod, Massachusetts, the strategy has been to define what the TMDLs, or daily maximum loads, are, and then base your sort of strategies on achieving or not exceeding the total daily maximum load. That seems like common sense. The basic question is, how much can that particular abatement take? How much are we giving it? How much do we have to reduce, or how much do we have to attenuate? Whereas in New York and in Maryland, the decision went forward to just do the best you can with the technologies you have. So that's a pretty sharp distinction, because it calls upon technologies to meet different benchmarks. When you're looking at Massachusetts, you're saying, okay, for instance, we just did some work with the Pleasant Bay Alliance, where they decided that in Brewster, for instance, in order to meet their TMDLs, their sort of commitment to TMDL compliance, they'd have to fit 219, I think, systems. Brian, correct me if I'm wrong, with systems that could get less than 12 milligrams per liter. Well, that's a pretty high benchmark. There are only 4 systems, 5 at the most, that can meet that benchmark as they presently come off their production line. Whereas the number of approved technologies in those areas, like the Chesapeake and New York, their benchmark is 19, and in one instance, it's as high as 30. So that's just a distinction I want to bring, because the technologies I'd like to bring forward tonight or talk about are those that could reasonably meet some of the more stringent standards that are required in most of the TMDLs. In fact, possibly some of the ones in Harwich. So I want to stay in my wheelhouse and talk just about those, as well as some other strategies to do with on-site wastewater. So it looks like there are, from the Chesapeake and from Maryland, there are 3 technologies from those 4 actually that rise to the top. There's Nitrex, which is sort of the high end in that it generally gets less than 10 and many times less than 5 milligrams per liter. Then there are some commercial units, some which are seeking approval in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and some which aren't. FujiClean, and the AX system, which is from Orenco, and that is presently approved as general use in Massachusetts for 19 milligrams per liter. The Nitro, which is a brand new unit, it was actually developed at MassTech by a small company on the island. It's looking as if it just got out of its piloting phase into provisional and looks like a very promising technology. The Nitrex and the Nitro are both wood-based. That is, their denitrification, that which removes the nitrogen from the wastewater in a final step, is based on wood, or really a waste product, sawdust or wood chips. So those 5 technologies are right up there, and people generally, the next question one asks is, okay, how much do they cost? And as you look at some of the cost information, I would say a very fair sort of price range to put most of them, if not all of them, in is somewhere between $20,000 and $25,000. Now, the three technologies that I mentioned out of New York that say they get less than 10, they have gotten less than 10 milligrams per liter, but it's not consistently less than 10 milligrams per liter. These are ones that are operating on the edge, the real edge of their abilities when you say, oh yeah, can they get 10 milligrams per liter or not? They're right on the edge. So these were the ones that we suggested, for instance, in the Pleasant Bay Alliance project, that these could possibly meet that 12 milligrams per liter that they were needing in that particular project to meet their TMDLs. So the short side is that it's an exciting time to be in the IA market because there's some good innovation occurring. It's being pushed by, you know, two large projects, and the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, though not a big market, places one more hurdle in the way. And I don't mean to call it a hurdle as much as a performance requirement, is that in most of the TMDLs that I've seen, when one wants to apply a wastewater strategy in that watershed, in each of the watersheds, you generally have to get down to those lower numbers, that being less than 10 and preferably less than 5. And when you think about that, there's really only two technologies that sort of get considerably, for the most part, will get down below 10, and that's nitrex and nitro. I was asked also to comment on sort of eco-toilets. Eco-toilets are, you know, a strategy in which primarily you're talking about things like composting toilets, although urine diversion is generally placed in there. As you may know, we did a project for the town of Falmouth, which in one way, it was a very successful project in that we were able to sort of outline how efficient these systems were. We got some we received fairly consistent data showing that, for instance, for phosphorus removal down less than 1 milligram per liter, for nitrogen less than 10 milligrams per liter, but not all the time less than 10, mainly because gray water has nitrogen in it too. In that way, it was a success in that we were pretty confident that we got the capability of the technology. Where it meets questionable success was encouraging anybody to use them. I mean, Falmouth gave some pretty interesting incentives. In one instance saying, I think it was a Little Pond area, they said, if you put in a composting toilet, you wouldn't have to hook up to the sewer and you would get, therefore never have to pay a betterment. Initially, a number of people said, gee, that sounds like a pretty good deal, composting toilet, no betterment, no continuing wastewater cost. Unfortunately, after an initial pretty good slug of people were interested, when it was explained to them what composting toilets did and what the operation and maintenance of those might look like, and I don't think by any stretch it was exaggerated, it came down to one person who said, okay, I'll do it. And that person, on further consideration and probably somewhat sort of concerned about what that might do to their real estate value, said no, they even backed out of it. So despite the fact that we got very good data and information about the performance of the system, it seems to me, and it seemed at the time and continues continue to feel this way, it's not quite reached the tipping point where people would say, yeah, enough people would say, yes, I think this is a way to handle our wastewater. But let's just say, just for sake of argument, that a town did do that and there was an area that it could work, then you would definitely need a management structure that would handle the residuals, so that the residuals being the compost tea and the compost itself, so that you're not just depositing it in the watershed that you're trying to get rid of the nitrogen. You'd have to have a management structure that would say, we're going to collect that. And I don't think that's terribly burdensome, by the way. I mean, I don't think the average home would create enough compost to really fertilize Aunt Martha's roses. And the tea for a general house would be probably at the outside about 200 gallons a year. That's about what we figured with the systems that we looked at. And the tea is fairly strong, so it's not like you're just going to dump that into your septic system or your gray water system, because you then just, you're playing the shell game with the nitrogen. You're collecting it and repackaging it just to disperse it the way it would have gone if you had a standard system. But this brings me to my final sort of informational outreach to your board and anybody thinking about IE systems, is the management structure for them. We know from experience nationwide that if you're not watching the systems that you're putting in or requiring, they aren't working. Because people being as they are, you're gonna see that electric bill creep up a little, and maybe you shut it down. Or maybe you don't want to have that maintenance contract every year, which is really a must. And if you don't have an appropriate management structure, then don't even start to think about putting IE systems in. And I mentioned this is an exciting time for being in IE systems. With some of our staff and the Cape Cod Commission, as well as some of DEP staff, they're starting to look at what a responsible management entity for IA systems would look like and what it would cost. And I think that particular effort is long overdue, because if these systems are ever going to be a meaningful part of a wastewater plan in a watershed, they really need to be maintained, monitored at some level. And that's a big unknown now. Brian will probably talk a little bit about that. Maintained at some level, just as you would the treatment plant that you would put in. And it makes it a little bit more difficult to deal with individual homeowners than it does a treatment plant, because you've got a staff at the treatment plant that just has to make that thing run. But when you've got, well, take the example of Brewster, 219 systems out there, they probably have to be, monitored to some extent. Possibly, I think Brian will talk to this, but maybe 10% a year, a month, excuse me, so that you can get an idea of your compliance rate. And they'll have to be maintained. And, people at first, they say, oh, no big deal. But as time goes on, and these systems have to be maintained in perpetuity, sometimes the enthusiasm drops. So the good news is there's some good technologies out there that could probably meet some of the stringent standards. The cost information, well, somebody says it's going to be $20,000 to $25,000. You just put that on the scale with what the other alternatives cost. The management entity, definitely a need, and it's with this new sort of committee that is put together and sort of looking at what that would look like. That should take shape in the next year or so to see how it would then serve any communities that decided to use alternative septic systems. So with that, I'll turn it over to questions from the board, or however you want to handle it, Joe.
Thank you, George. I think I'd rather do, I would take one or two questions, but then I'd like to move to Brian. Sandy, did you have a question?
Yes, thanks, Mr. Chair. I was talking to Chris Killian at Conservation Law Foundation today, and he was talking about Barnstable and Mashpee and the DEP, that they're really trying to get people to come up with solutions that affect their embayments at this time, not 30 years down the road. And you mentioned, Mr. Hoyfelder, that other states have kind of taken the approach of do the best with what you have, whereas Massachusetts is looking for the TMDL targets, the maximum daily loads. And I wonder if, George, you could speak maybe to the, maybe some of the advantages of an IA could be that it could be placed in a location close to the bay, whereas maybe some other systems like sewer, if they're beyond the 10-year time of travel, might not reap the benefits for at least 10 years. So I know it's a convoluted question, but kind of this idea of, from what I gathered from CLF is they're looking for, failed Title V systems to stop being installed. And I see IAs as maybe a great opportunity to really do the best with what we got. Do the other things as well, not to say don't do sewer or whatever, but to really attack the problem where it's worst, on the shoreline and as soon as possible. I use the example, yeah, if it's unattenuated. If somebody's dying, they're choking to death, Mass General Hospital might be the best place to treat them. But maybe your spouse or your neighbor who's right there may not do the best job, but they could save your life. And so maybe IAs can maybe not reach the 1 milligram per liter that sewers do, but they might be able to save the patient. I wonder if you could respond to those thoughts.
Sure, it's a great question, and it's not only a question in regard to how you would apply it, but also in relation to those towns that already have made decision to sewer. Falmouth, where I'm on the Board of Health in Falmouth, and they've decided to sewer certain areas. And some of those plans are 20 years out, some of them are 10 years out, and some of them are, my goodness, I'll be on the other side of the veil by the time they get here. And the big decision there is, do you do something in the meantime? And it's a really we the people decision that has to be made. We're struggling now with, okay, at what point do you decide just to do something, because this thing's 10 years out. And in 10 years, these people will have to hook up to the sewer, unless, of course, perhaps it's discovered that, gee, what they did was good enough. That's kind of unlikely, but possible. And I would say that each community has to decide what the urgency is and how they will impose that urgency upon those who are the most directly impacting the bay. And Maryland gave a shot at that. They said, well, if you're within 100 feet of the bay or a leading water, you'll do X, even though they knew that there might be some centralized options coming their way. And within 300 feet, you do Y. You'd have a different level of treatment, but you do it. So direct answer to your question, each community has to decide that. If they do something now, what will be the appetite for somebody to do something later, which is going to cost them money also? And is it urgent enough in any particular embayment, or if to compel by force of law, is it urgent enough to do something now? I always say, I think that, and I think your question before the meeting was, is it worth it to do something right on the shoreline or a certain distance back more immediately, because you should be able to see some immediate effect? Well, you might be able to pick that effect up, but remember, the immediate shoreline, although it contributes, it's that big wave coming from the watershed also has a big impact. So we're about to make that decision here in Falmouth. And I think at the 10-year mark, we're going to say, you know, if it's just in the plan and you want to build out this lot, no, you're going to have to put an IA system in. Or if you're going to add that extra bedroom. I think we're headed that way. And it's not a bad strategy because we can't wait forever. You're right. And something to be done is better than nothing in a 10-year window. But where does that window stop? Is it at 5 years? Is it at 10 years? Is it 15 years? I'm kind of leaning on anything 10 years further and out. You know, start your actions now. Because if the sewer isn't going to get there for 10 years, and even that's kind of a big question, then maybe you want to do it. Maybe you want to just impose the IA systems in there. And if they have to disconnect them when they're hooking up to the sewer, if that's the final solution, then, you know, you've had 10 years of attenuation.
Okay, thank you, George. Let me move on to Brian then, and for that part of the discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think what I'd like to start out with is just explaining what the approval and regulatory process is for IA systems in Massachusetts under Title V. We have 4 different categories: general use, provisional use, piloting, and remedial use. But for the point and the purposes of our discussion tonight, I'll just focus on general, provisional, and piloting. Piloting is essentially the entry-level category where it's more than bench scale development, but is, I think, really sort of proof of concept. Somebody has an idea, it hasn't been tried before, so they get to put in up to 15 systems for a period of up to 18 months. And if 75% of those systems are able to meet the projected quality of effluent, then they are able to advance into the provisional use category, where they're allowed to install up to 50 systems and have 3 years worth of operating data. And if 90% of those systems meet the effluent quality thresholds that were projected or requested under that provisional use, then they are eligible to apply for general use approval, which really becomes then an accepted technology. As George said, right now, the general use approval IA systems that we have for nitrogen removal are for either 19 milligrams per liter or 25 milligrams per liter, neither of which, in the vast majority of cases, is going to be sufficient to meet the targets that we need to meet for nitrogen reduction, for an overall mass load reduction, in order to achieve the target thresholds in the embayments in order to meet the TMDL. And the TMDL, the total and the maximum daily load, essentially is a nutrient budget that tells us how much of a particular pollutant a system can accommodate. And as we know, the vast majority of systems on the Cape are exceeding their capacity, and therefore the TMDLs are setting thresholds that require significant reductions in nitrogen loads. And that while we focus on the target concentration within the water column, it's an easy thing to measure. The real goal is habitat restoration, because we have lost significant habitat. We have lost significant resources. We know that eelgrass have been lost. That can be directly attributed to over-enrichment due to nitrogen. We have nuisance algae that proliferates in the embayments. That leads to significant degradation in habitat quality that provides opportunities for aesthetic issues such as noxious weeds and odors, to something more serious, which is the depletion of dissolved oxygen, which in turn leads to periodic fish kills. So these are the things that we're looking to avoid and eliminate, while at the same time reestablishing healthy habitat in our coastal systems. And Mr. Powers had alluded earlier to the Massachusetts Estuaries Project, and that was a concerted effort throughout southeastern Massachusetts to evaluate the health of the embayment systems themselves, and also more significantly, I think, to develop a unique system-specific model that would enable towns to test out various scenarios, looking at a wide variety of options from sewering to how IA systems may be able to work within the context of an overall management plan, to other things about like inlet widening, to enhancing natural attenuation. And with the advent of the Cape Cod 208 plan update, there are other options that have been identified, such as permeable reactive barriers that may be able to treat nitrogen in the groundwater, and then some in-stream strategies that, among other things, include shellfish aquaculture. So, we're looking at the potential for a wide variety of things, but to get back to IA systems, the fact is, as George said, there really is no system right now under general use that can get down to the levels that are necessary to achieve the goals of the total and maximum daily load. And George had mentioned, ballpark figures about, $25,000 for an installation of an IA system, and that's going to vary widely. But we just recently received some information from the Barnstable Clean Water Coalition, who is looking to install about 10 to 15 nitro systems in Barnstable at Shubal Pond. And the manufacturer's actual estimates came in at about $23,000 for a retrofit using nitro, and approximately $30,000 to $33,000 for a new system, and that's for the installation. We would be looking then also at additional annual costs for sampling and monitoring. And with respect to that, as part of Brewster's evaluation of those 219 systems, that was part of a federal grant program called a SNEP grant that the Pleasant Bay Alliance had sponsored. And as part of that exercise, we had to come up with a monitoring plan. And basically the way that monitoring plan would work is that for any IA system, and these would have to be IA systems under general use approval, 10% of those systems would be sampled every month, so that every system would be sampled at least once a year, and some of them would be sampled twice a year. So say if you had 219 systems, you don't have to sample each one of those 219 systems every month. You'd be sampling 22 of them every month. And it would be on a rotating basis. However, those systems would have to have an actual physical site visit once a month to ensure that they were still operational and still working. And then furthermore, if a system is sampled and found not to be meeting its effluent limits, then there would have to be additional rounds of sampling and then possibly even further investigation into the operation of that particular system until we could ensure that it was either operating the way it should and meet its limits, or have to get replaced with something else that would be able to meet those limits if we can't solve the problem on that particular installation. So, you know, IA systems certainly are an option. They're a tool that can be used, but they would have to be applied. They would have to be applied in the appropriate venue, under the appropriate circumstances, and in a way that would be consistent with an overall plan that would meet the TMDL. Excuse me. So that's a brief overview of what the system, what the IA approval process is and how IA systems could be integrated into a plan. Mr. Chairman, if there are any questions, I would be glad to entertain them at this time.
Yeah, I certainly, we have time for a couple questions if there's any. As I said, I don't want to turn this into a debate, but I'd be, go ahead. Claire, please.
Yes. Clara McClarty from East Harwich. I was wondering if the pond in Barnstable that's going to be installing 10, if they have come up with a plan for the monitoring and the checking in, and if they have costs yet?
Yes, they would have. That system currently is under a provisional use approval, and its provisional use approval outlines very specifically what the monitoring has to be. And let me see, they have come up with costs of monitoring that would range for provisional, would range anywhere from about $1,150 to $1,300 per year. And that probably would be somewhat in line with what we would be expecting on a long-term basis, because again, these are treatment systems put in place to solve a very difficult issue, and we would have to ensure that they are monitored commensurate with that significance, just like we routinely monitor and sample for at municipal wastewater treatment plants, even though the technologies used at those wastewater treatment plants are very well known and very well designed.
My other question was, in the Massachusetts Estuary Project, they talk a lot about adaptive management, and they encourage the concept that, well, there's going to be within Pleasant Bay watershed where I live, testing every 5 years, and we're just about to get some updates on how much the Muddy Creek project helped the embayment. But so with IA systems, it seems to me that if we used some, in the future, we would receive updated TMDLs, and the adaptive management approach would mean that we would see how close those systems are bringing us to our target, and then possibly reduce the amount of sewer needed if we do see that they're having a beneficial effect, if it's measured. Once it's measured, then our target changes. Is that correct?
Well, I think when you talk about the target changing, it depends upon what target you're talking about. The TMDL itself is not going to change. The amount of load reduction, depending upon the placement and types of technologies being used, the landward load reduction may change, but the concentration at the sentinel stations, the concentration within the water column that is necessary to reestablish habitat quality, whether it's eelgrass or benthic animal habitat, is not going to change. Those are fixed. Those are empirically derived within each watershed. But I think the thing is that, you know, under the existing watershed permit that the Pleasant Bay communities have, you're correct. We are going to be looking at, you know, five-year updates in terms of both the activities that have occurred and measuring response to any of those activities as they have occurred. And we have always talked about adaptive management. We have always said that, you know, we will let the data dictate what the level of intervention has to be. Right now, based on the models, we predict, we don't know for certain, but we predict that there has to be a certain level of intervention. If some of that intervention is enabled and authorized and constructed, then we can see what the response is in the environment. But the other thing, the other side of the coin too, is that adaptive management cuts both ways. We may see improvement before we expected it, or we may do everything that we need to do and not see the improvement that we expected, and therefore we would have to go back and reevaluate our approaches. You know, I'm not saying that that's certainly going to be the case, but I think everyone has to keep in mind that there are two sides of the coin here. That, you know, we're going to do what we want, or what we propose to do, and it's going to have the results that we want, or we're going to do what we propose to do, and we may not quite reach our targets.
We just heard from zoning people tonight talking about something that recently passed where it makes it easier for people to add apartments and, you know, extra multifamily, you know, which is an affordable housing consideration, but all of those kind of things and the construction that's been going on in East Harwich since I moved here will bring us farther away from our goal, obviously. And then if we do other beneficial things, we could start to get closer, but it's a matter of balancing them.
Yeah, and I agree, Claudia. Let's bring that back as another discussion when we talk zoning and control, if you will. We'll keep that in mind. It's an important discussion. Don?
Yeah, while we've got Brian here, I mean, I'm just going to reassert something I said before, because I've been on the Clean Waters Management Board in the county for the rooms tax. I'm on the DHY task force. I do hear a variation of, you know, if we do this, we can actually build more from a lot of different towns. I personally, my destination point is looking at those maximum daily loads within the context of, I'm not trying to replicate the growth of Mashpee or Barnstable or any other place. The end destination here is the sewering that's sufficient to get us to fixing what it was we broke over the years. It's not about affording an opportunity to make it even worse. And I am concerned about that, because we keep talking zoning as the attenuating factor in East Harwich. It's a drinking water resource protection district, and a large amount of it. That is what's been holding back the building, not the zoning itself.
Well, actually, if I could address that, I think I'd like to address it in a couple of ways. For decades, the department has been telling communities not to rely on Title V or wastewater regulations as de facto zoning. That that if communities really want to address zoning for whatever purposes there are, whether it's for economic growth, whether it's for environmental protection, whether it's, for affordable housing, that is best handled through comprehensive planning and zoning, not relying on wastewater regulations, which never contemplated or anticipated zoning considerations. And, I would point to Provincetown as, a very good example. For years, Provincetown had rejected sewering, even as far back as the 70s, when the federal government was providing 90% of the funding. For that very reason, they were concerned about explosive growth. Back in the early 2000s, actually, George and I worked on Provincetown very closely. We faced massive opposition to sewering, and it was incredibly important to sewer downtown Commercial Street because we were having cesspools from restaurants overflowing, and this is no lie, once a week. There would be raw sewage flowing down Commercial Street. And that's when people finally realized that something had to be done. But again, there was this concern about explosive growth. We addressed that in the plan. We ended up getting overwhelming support for the plan. And Provincetown was very, very good in developing appropriate zoning, appropriate sewer ordinances that addressed those concerns about explosive growth. And I think by and large, they have been very, very successful in managing that. And, I would suggest that, for people who are concerned about that, look to them as an example and talk to them as to how they addressed it and how they could handle it. Because the other thing also, and not to get too far afield, but the bottom line is that whatever happens in the community, the nitrogen load that you have to deal with is the nitrogen load that you have to deal with. And if there's going to be new construction, that is going to have to be accounted for in some form or fashion and offset in some form or fashion. As I said, it's a combination of things that have to go into the overall planning.
Brian, that was my point all along, though, because every conversation we've had over the last couple of years that I'm familiar with keeps talking about, well, you can't do anything more than what zoning calls for. What's been holding this back has not been the zoning, and we have to actually look at that if we're going to be chasing whatever goal it is we're going to be chasing. If we're going to be chasing growth, that's a whole different sewer system than if we're chasing remediation.
Well, and I don't want to get into that discussion because that is a town discussion, and that is something that I think you guys are going to have to face. But my only point in bringing up P-Town was they had the same concerns that you did. They faced it, and they've been pretty successful in managing it.
Okay, thank you, Don. I think I'll take one last question if there is one for either Brian or George, and I'd like to move on and just assure you that this will be a continued discussion. Let me make one last comment. If there is, I know Sandy and Claire, you're on the line, but there are also other people on the line that have additional questions in this regard. Could you send them in to Joe and he'll disperse them to either George or Brian or experts or internal experts get some response to? And we'll continue this. Thank you, George, and thank you, Brian, very much. Good discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And Joel, thank you for starting this discussion. And we'll move on next to the new business.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The other topic tonight is, well, it's the fiscal year 2022 budget. I'm just going to set my presentation up, and this is something that I shared with the board by email late tonight and will be added to the website. And it'll just help me frame my points on the budget itself. And mercifully, there we go. So, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, first I'll rely upon the memorandum with today's date, or I should say the letter, because this is in accordance with the charter, my presentation of a comprehensive budget and budget message for fiscal year 2022. I have a few slides to go through very briefly. Really, and the intent tonight is to just pass this information over to you on the board, and at the conclusion of the presentation, we'll be talking about next steps. But this begins officially the process of discussing and eventually debating the operating budget for the next fiscal year. And Mr. Chairman, members of the board, as you'll see in that memorandum, I talk about the fact that the overall message that I wish to convey in concert with this budget is a message of cautious optimism. Optimism because we are presently in the midst of the first phases of vaccination, as we heard Megan talking about earlier. And that process offers hope that perhaps the worst of the physical effects of COVID-19 will soon, hopefully, mercifully be behind us. But a cautious message as well, because we cannot yet envision what a post-COVID-19 economy and society will reap or to bear upon us in the coming months and years ahead. And it does dismay me that we are now talking for the second consecutive fiscal year where we had once hoped to be out of the pandemic and the grips of it. We are still squarely in it, and the pandemic has its effects upon the budget as well. The budget that I present to you this evening is balanced, as is required under the charter, but not without some significant effort, not the least of which was the effort by our department heads to meet the directive that I conveyed on behalf of the board for level funding. Before I get into the particulars, I'd just like to go over some information that I found useful. The intent tonight is to try and put out as much general information as I can at present about the state of our community, if you will. And so you can't talk about an operating budget of a municipality, unfortunately, without talking about your tax bill and your tax rate. And so clearly, as you'll see the chart on the left, there has been a steady year-over-year growth in the single-family average tax bill. And for what it's worth, how we compare to our immediate neighbors and those towns that we're most closely associated with. And then beyond that, some further detail that I found useful coming from the Division of Local Services in the Department of Revenue. This information corresponds to their dashboards. And all of this information on this slide talks more about where we are as a community in relation to, again, what's known as the average single family tax bill or the average single family value. And again, this will be more for further reference for anybody to get into, but just on this slide here, you'll notice that the trends are consistent in each of the categories, if you will, with some surprising differences. And that is, you'll see that on the left-hand column on the third chart on the bottom, it doesn't necessarily feel like it, and I know taxes are a very personal and a very dividing topic, but the reality shows that while there was growth in the average single family tax bill year over year, the past year has seen a very modest increase in the overall tax bill. And eventually that will get into the discussion that we'll have in the fall of setting the tax rate. But as you may recall, the finance director and I, in presenting materials to you back in the fall to set the tax rate, have pledged that we're looking to make sure that the tax rate itself, as much as possible, can remain stable. And so we're going to be endeavoring to make sure that there are not wild swings in the tax rate and in the ensuing tax bills. And then I talked about the effects of COVID-19, and that's in a financial standing, never more relevant than this data. This was recently released by the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics. And so if there's an upside, you can see in the chart on the left, what the past year looked like in Harwich with regard to unemployment rates. And obviously some just mind-boggling and staggering numbers that we can see at the outset of the pandemic, and mercifully have dipped much lower. But in the second chart, you'll see that as you compare year over year, all the success of unemployment, if you will, is relative. While we're in the single digits for unemployment in our community, we still are almost double what we were 2 years ago, and just under being triple from what we were a year ago. So quite obviously, the numbers on unemployment, while relatively hopeful compared to the Cape and the Commonwealth as a whole, is still very concerning for us here in Harwich. And I reference these statistics and this information because these are the things that have played on my mind as I try to meet the requirements of the charter and the directives of the board. And the board's directive, I think, was very prescient in that you had talked about building a budget that, as much as possible, tries to provide relief to the taxpayers. So to that end, Mr. Chairman and members of the board, what you have before you in the packet is a budget that meets your directives. Your directive was to require a budget that is at most 2% higher than the fiscal year 2021. And as you can see, with regard to the departmental operating budgets, the increase is less than 1% at 0.6%. You then further state in your budget message and directive to develop a level funded budget. And I'm very pleased to report that far more than a majority of the departmental budgets have been level funded. Now, far more than a majority is not unanimity. And there are some instances that I'm prepared to discuss over the coming weeks where I had to make the decision to have a department come in at above level funding. And in most instances, it was because the impact on their budget would have then put the town on a path of a labor action, if you will. And that would be in a reduction in hours or a reduction in force. And given that we haven't ventured down that path yet, I thought it the more prudent step to make sure that those departments that would have required a reduction in force by reducing hours, to have them come in ahead of level fund, if for no other reason, so that we can have the substantive discussions on those actions and going forward over the next several weeks. However, the departments that have done level funding, there have been impacts on programs. Most notably, right off the bat, is the street lighting budget continues to be reduced year over year. And as I mentioned before, the cemetery department is in desperate need of additional staffing, and we're not able to proceed with that this year. As a happy side note, a coincidental note, you have some changes in the administration department that allow for a surplus. And so there's the net reduction overall in the administration budget. And depending upon how a few votes go tonight and perhaps in the coming weeks, there will be a commensurate reduction in the health department budget. And then there were some savings, for lack of a better phrase, and though it's all relative. But as you may recall, Mr. Chairman and members of the board, we had been anticipating a decision by the Cape Cod Municipal Health Group with regard to the health insurance premiums and rates for the coming fiscal year. I think it was very wise of our finance director to recommend to me a conservative estimate of a 5% growth. I know other communities and districts were looking at zero growth. And in the end, the governing body of the Municipal Health Group for health insurance came up with increases in both Blue Cross Blue Shield and Harvard Pilgrim And so our conservative approach, if you will, has blunted potentially the effects of those increases on the operating budget from the town's perspective. As you're accustomed to seeing, and as you see in the packet of materials that was presented or put in the packet for this discussion, we have that standard page that we look to for a description of the sources and uses of funds. And so to dive deeper into that, you'll see that sources of funds, some of the notable items, obviously we have increase in the levy limit. There is at present an estimation of a 4% growth in local receipts, although there's more on that later. And although it's shocking to me, having come from off Cape, to see state aid be such a paltry number here on Cape Cod, at least we see almost a 0.5% increase. And then you can see that this budget relies less upon transfers in as it did in the previous year. Now, those funds are looking to be used, as you can see, in the cherry sheet charges. So when I talk about the state aid, it is immediately negated by the cherry sheet charges, both to the state and to the county and other entities. You can say that we've expect the increase of the overlay, and that's getting into abatements, which given the nature of the economy right now, and we anticipate to see some growth in that activity as well. As I mentioned, the operating budget itself increases by less than 1%. Some of the semi-fixed costs that you'll see there are up significantly. The Cape Cod Tech has an overall reduction, and again, as we heard from Aaron Orchid a few weeks ago, that's tied to enrollment. And of course, we'll have a discussion 2 nights hence with Monomoy Regional School Committee and the town of Chatham to talk generally about assessments and the growing chasm between what each community has to bear for their assessments. And so you can see that the school district is coming in at 3.7%, higher than last year. Free cash, as we know, played a significant role in fiscal year 21. And I thought it prudent to really just list for everybody what I understand has been in the past, if you will, items that have historically been used, free cash has been used to support. And so as you see in the chart here, we start out with a balance of 3.9 million, just over. The capital plan, which I included in the packet, comes in at just over $7.5 million. But if you may recall, the Capital Outlay Committee and I began with a capital budget that was upwards of $20 million. And so now the capital plan, as presented this evening in the budget, overall budget is at $7.5 million, and just under 1.4 of that is going to be supported by free cash. As we talked before, there's the quote reimbursement for the stabilization fund. As you recall, the town, we took the unusual step, and town meeting supported, of using stabilization to offset the budget deficits that we were looking at last year. As we committed at town meeting, this makes the stabilization fund whole from that activity last year at town meeting. You'll see that sewer operations and maintenance, this has been an ongoing support item for free cash. It continues this year. That is our Harwich assessment for the, or our share of the Monomoy capital plan for the current year. All standards that you've seen before with snow and ice, IT equipment, promoting town of Harwich in support of our Chamber of Commerce, supporting the other libraries in town, and the various cultural efforts related to the local cultural council. And so that brings the free cash usage to just over 3.1 million. And it's my understanding that historically Harwich has had the practice of putting the balance of free cash towards OPEB and stabilization. It's not here on the slide, but I would note in the operating budget, I have recommended that we restore the $125,000 that we did not put in to OPEB last year as our regular annual contribution. And I'm suggesting an additional 125 for this year, and that puts the town back on solid footing with its contributions to OPEB. And for the benefit of those who don't know, that is other post-employment benefits. And as we're going to get into the discussion over the coming weeks, I just want to remind the board of what we have on the horizon. We are currently in negotiations with two collective bargaining unions whose contracts expired with the last fiscal year. We are in active negotiations with them. And this also now times into when I will be reaching out to those three other associations to initiate the procedures and process on negotiating those contracts as we get into the conclusion of this fiscal year. And as I've reminded, I've suggested to the board that there be a 0% cost of living adjustment, or COLA, factored into the budget for fiscal year 22, and the board has endorsed that, and that would be a major consideration for the fiscal year. Despite the 0% potential for COLAs, there are still several other contractual obligations that still remain in force and in effect in the contracts that the town will continue to meet its obligations on. Just a few charts that the finance director was able to provide, and Carol was wise to remind me that in years past, these tend to be questions that arise. And so I thought it best to put it in this introductory PowerPoint to get that information out there ahead. And you can see the chart on the left is the 5-year wage comparison by departments. The chart on the right compares overtime by departments also over the 5-year period. And then we have the combination of the school districts, both Monomoy and Cape Tech. And you can see how the budget numbers have increased and how they've been allocated over the last several years. And then to start closing out the presentation this evening, Mr. Chairman and members of the board, several topics that may come up for discussion once I hand this over to the board for your discussion over the several weeks. There has been discussion and talks about potentially increasing estimated receipts on golf, and that's to reflect what is anticipated to be another banner year in activity at the golf course. I think the good news is people will be able to continue to golf and golf more. The bad news is, because we still expect a spring and summer that's going to be impacted by COVID, so we're going to be seeking those opportunities that get us out in the fresh air but still allow us to socially distance. There'll be more information coming about the net effect of the vote on the Cape Cod Municipal Health Group insurances. There was a concept known as a premium holiday, and it's going to be a substantive discussion that I need to have with the board to determine whether the town wishes to take the advantage of the so-called premium holiday, which is a one-time savings this year, in the next fiscal year, or if we want to just bite the bullet to try and smooth out what will be a significant increase in health insurance in the following fiscal year. And then you can see the various discussion points that we'll get into, possibly if the board is so willing, to talk about various other funding sources that may be relied upon to help with wastewater operations or O&M costs as we get more deeply into wastewater operations. So the next steps and deliverables, the key deadlines for the board based on the charter. I would recommend, Mr. Chairman, that next week you begin, the board begin discussing potential amendments to the operating budget as presented. In fact, I would recommend that you take 2 swipes of that before your charter mandate of passing over the administrator's budget with or without amendments to the Finance Committee towards the end of the month. And then beginning in March, which sadly, or depending upon your perspective, I'm concerned about timing, but March is fast approaching and we'll begin earnest discussions about the warrant articles. The TBD is a reference back to what I'm sure many of you recall fondly, which I had the pleasure of participating in one last year, but that is the traditional round robin event that takes place on a Saturday, where the Board of Selectmen meets jointly with the Finance Committee, and there's a deep dive into many of the departmental budgets. I know when this topic came up in the fall, the board expressed that there may not be a desire to necessarily do that because it's going to go to meeting. But I do think it's a worthy discussion, Mr. Chairman, to bring at your meeting next week to potentially rely upon a dedicated day. Doesn't have to be a Saturday, but I would hate to miss the opportunity for the board, the Finance Committee, and staff predominantly to present their budgets as proposed in my budget. And then last, it seems like the best time to deliver some potentially disappointing news as I see it, but I am still planning with a hopeful eye towards town meeting to occur as it is normally scheduled to do in our charter, and that is the first Monday in May, which will be May 3rd this year, 6:30 in the evening in the community center. Having said that, and based on information I'm receiving that we all get, I think it may be more prudent perhaps to look at another outdoor town meeting. And so I have worked with Superintendent Carpenter, and he has reserved the dates. I have 2 dates in mind for middle of May, but whatever the date, I think it's important to have our town meeting occur and be concluded before the annual town election occurs on Tuesday, May 18th. Well, Mr. Chairman, I'll stop sharing the screen. That is, again, my official handing over of the operating budget for fiscal year 22 to you and the board for future action.
Thank you, Joe. We have a lot of work ahead of us, starting next week. Questions or comments for Joe?
Very good presentation, Joe. It's probably the most comprehensive I've seen in 20 years.
Yep.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Fully agree. John, did you getting ready to say something? If not, we'll move on. It was a great presentation, and we'll put some items on next week to get us started then. Sandy, did you have a comment, question?
No, I just wanted to say thank you, Joe. That was clear. I was able to follow along. I'm still learning all the terminology. In fact, I asked my wife, what's that term, post, what was it?
OPEB, yeah.
OPEB, you read my mind as I was asking my wife. So thank you.
Great, it was a good, I agree, Sandy. Thank you for that. Let's move on to the next agenda item then, Joe, which is the
Mr. Chairman, if I may, I have been eagerly awaiting this moment tonight and this moment in my service as your town administrator, and I'm absolutely thrilled to present to the board for your consideration and your opportunity to affirm my recommendation of the appointment, or I'm recommending for appointment, Megan Eldridge, our very own public health director, to serve in the role of assistant town administrator. And I can certainly answer any concerns that everyone has that as good as Megan will be in the job of ATA, what will we do about health? And the short answer is administration and health will work together to make sure that there is no drop in service. And in fact, I think when the processes are all done, you'll see that there's a stronger than ever commitment between administration and the health department. But I am thrilled to present her name to you. She is my appointment, and I seek your affirmation of that appointment.
Larry?
I see Ed.
Yes, I'd like to move to affirm the appointment of Megan Eldridge as the assistant town administrator.
Second.
I just comment that I couldn't be more pleased. Megan's shown great, this sounds trite, intelligence, but willing to communicate all the aspects we're looking for. Plus, as we found with fire and others, is great to be able to promote someone from within. And that's extremely, shows that we're, one of my complaints over the years is we haven't always done a good job of training and putting people in places to be promoted. And so that's very positive as well. There's no other,
Larry?
Don?
Yeah, I just want
Steve, and then,
something obvious
Yeah,
also.
excuse me, Don,
It's not-
Steve first. I'll come back to you. Steve?
Okay. I just wanted to say, in observing this candidate, we've had a real good chance to observe her work during this COVID period. And what a time it's been. I mean, it's probably one of the most demanding, throw yourself in the end of the pool situations you could ever have. And I have watched Megan evolve with that in a way that gives me great confidence that she'll end up being a terrific assistant town administrator.
Thank you, Steve. Don, sorry for cutting you off.
No, that's fine. I just wanted to make another fairly obvious comment, at least it is to me. I appreciate the fact that it affirms our commitment to putting females into major positions in this town, as well as promoting people who of value who we have here, because obviously you don't wind up with the morale in any of these organizations if you make it clear to them we're going to go outside all the time to promote people. So in every single way that you could measure this is a tremendous selection.
I'm going to take a vote with just one final comment. It's important to us all. We've confirmed Joe's town administrator. It's important to us all that he is able to choose his team, so he can move forward. And so I'm very appreciative of that too. With that being said, I'll take a roll call. Steve?
Aye.
Ed?
Aye.
Don?
Aye.
And I'm an aye. So Megan, if you're still on the, I think you're still here.
Congratulations.
Congratulations, Megan, and we look forward to, I guess we'll continue working with you, but you can talk to us about something other than COVID every time.
Eventually, I think COVID will be on the list for a while, but thank you all.
Eventually.
Of course, I'm
Okay.
going to miss working with you over the food vendors for the Cranberry Festival.
We'll
That's
have a
always
good health
tough.
director.
Yeah, I think Megan set it up, so we're going to, and Joel, they set it up so we're well covered. We haven't spoken to that, but we couldn't be in better shape.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to
Okay.
take a moment to thank you for your comments and for the board for your support. I didn't do it justice. I should have read my memorandum, but it was a very easy memo to write. I'm thrilled to be able to continue working with Megan, and I know she's going to make an immediate impact because we have a meeting tomorrow morning at 8:30. So, but thank you all very much for the support, and Megan, congratulations, well earned.
Thank you very much.
Moving on then, Joel, to Special Counsel on the Affordable Housing Trust, or is that Don who's?
If I may, on behalf of Mr. Howell, first, this is, the board is required, the board is the only entity authorized to name counsel, and Mr. Howell can speak to the need of the Affordable Housing Trust. This is just a perfunctory administrative matter. I would recommend that the board motion and approve the use of special counsel by and through the Affordable Housing Trust.
And Don, I'll turn it to you. I think you explained this to us last time, however.
Yeah, I mean, we just need something that's faster and more nimble than going through KP law. And we have actually, I tasked Larry Brophy with helping me and looking for counsel. And it's Robinson and Cole that we would like to suggest that be appointed special counsel. And we very much appreciate the opportunity to work with the Board of Selectmen over this so that we can actually move some projects that are pending forward.
I don't see a lot of discussion. I entertain a motion.
Yeah, I move that we vote to appoint Robinson and Cole special counsel on behalf of the Affordable Housing Trust.
There's a second?
I'm hoping that Ed would.
I'll second it.
I did.
Okay, Ed did. Good. Thank you, Ed. Hearing no other discussion, I'll take a roll call. Don,
Aye.
Ed,
All right,
Steve,
Aye.
and I'm an aye. So you have the.
I appreciate the
4
board's
votes.
action, Larry.
Thank you, Don. Well, we need to do everything we can to keep this going. So, we're gonna help with that.
Oh.
And we can sue the dog next.
Mr. Chairman, next on the agenda, you'll see we have Chairman of the Traffic Safety Committee, Jerry Beltis, on to discuss the materials and memorandum that he has in the packet.
Thank you,
It's,
Jerry. And I
relative
see you
to,
have
Freeman.
Linda on as well. And thank you for looking into this. I know we referred this to you from letters we got, but that's your role in life. So we'll turn it to you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. So this is something that's been worked on by the Traffic Safety Committee. Some of my notes go back to 2016, so this is not something that's new. That's been generating complaints and concerns for at least 4 years. And the latest one was from Selectman McCaskill, and we decided to push as hard as we could to get something on the agenda to get this done. In working with Griffin, we tried to look at the engineering plans that are going forward for other projects in Harwich Port to try and find out where the property lines are from the state highway to the personal property owners down in that area, to see what we could find out for line of sight. Line of sight on Freeman Street, looking both east and west on Route 28, seems to be problematic. And without having stakes in the ground to see where the property is, to see if the line of sight could be approved, seems to be part of the problem. So working with Griffin, he has spoke to some of the engineers that are working on the other projects in the port. And he has come up with some recommendations. If you want to speak to that, Griffin.
Sure. Hi, everyone. So working with, as Jerry mentioned, we know Route 28 is a state road. So in order to even survey on Route 28, we need to basically file a permit. So we had a presentation a couple weeks ago from VHB. They're the design firm that's doing the engineering, or has done the preliminary engineering for the sidewalk from Brax down to Harwich Port. But in order to engage that preliminary engineering, they worked through Mass DOT to obtain a land survey firm, which basically did the base mapping of Route 28 through there. And that firm is, I believe it's A+ survey. So I've reached out to VHB to engage A+ survey, because since they've already done the base mapping, they've already done the calculations. So therefore, for the town to have them go and put these stakes in the ground or markers in the ground so we can clearly see where the divide is, will be much more cost effective. And it'll be half the cost, if not more, than it would be to hire someone else to do that. So working with VHB, I've gotten that contact, and the next step would be to work with the survey firm to just get a proposal to not only file the permit with Mass DOT, that they're in good shape to do that because they've already done the work with Mass DOT, so I don't think that's a big deal. And then put the stakes in the ground for us. So with the permit application, the town is required to sign. So that's why I wanted to come before you tonight. We will get that, with the positive outcome tonight. I would engage the survey firm to get a firm number to us. I anticipate on the range of, well, it depends on how much we're gonna stake out. Jerry and I have gone over it a little bit, but I anticipate we're talking, a couple $1,000s, maybe a little bit more. Happy to answer any other questions.
Jerry, I think that was your primary request in your memo you sent to us, was staking it out so we knew what the next steps were going to be.
Yes, the problem areas seem to be what seems to be the line of sight from Freeman Street, but also across from Snow Inn. So I would like to see it staked out from Freeman Street to the church going to the east towards Chatham, and to the west towards the ice cream shop, and just see what the property lines on the state road versus the individual properties are. And on the other side of the road, from Snow Inn down to the overlook, heading towards the east, and seeing what the property lines there are. And by getting those properties staked out, we could see if there is a line of sight issue, if there is infringement on town property, state property, then we can go ahead and give notification to the property owners that their property is infringing on the town, state roads, and have the vegetation or whatever is in the way cleared out. It seems to be a problem that happens occasionally. I know that when they did the ball field up behind the community center, there was some infringement on the town property out there. And I seem to recall, and maybe Ed can refresh our memory, that there was either conservation land or cemetery land that when they started doing surveying, they found that there was infringement on the town properties. I'd like to see that somehow in the future that we do some on-site or off-site mitigation. The Witchmere Harbor Club Snow Inn property keeps coming to the town asking for some variances in the planning board. And I know that when the Stop and Shop and Shaw's went in, they did some work for the town, the roundabout, and some work out on 124. So that maybe if the Snow Inn Witchmere Harbor property, I know that they have something coming before the planning board tomorrow night, but it's a little too late to be asking them for funds. But to have them do a study for the traffic and engineering at that intersection to see if they can give back a little to the town for what has been going on down there. And as it's more non-compliant and grandfathered, maybe there's some things that they can help us out with. The money is a little bit on the surprise side. It's $4,000. It might be the high side from what Griffin's thinking, but I don't know whose budget the money would come from. I don't know if Griffin has money in his budget or if there's money in some engineering budget for this to come forward.
Hey, Larry, Steve Ford.
Yeah, Steve.
Hey, Griff, can't some of this be done in conjunction with our sidewalk initiative that's taking place, where we got some good news earlier this past week? You know, I would think that the design of the sidewalk, especially as it runs through that intersection, would allow us to perhaps, you know, incorporate within that some of what is being asked today.
Larry, if I may, yes, I think it can, and we've talked about that. But I think, you know, Jerry and to Linda's, you know, to their I mean, they're trying to get something done a little more quickly, and because I think this is, as Jerry said, it's been going on for a while. So I think Jerry was in my conversations with Jerry, he was hoping to get, you know, those stakes in the ground a little more quickly than that sidewalk project might take us.
Oh, okay.
I think that's, you know, I agree. I think we could do it that way, but we could, in fact, get stakes in the ground, you know, within a couple months if we were to go this other route.
Okay.
Yeah.
Linda?
Okay.
Linda? Go ahead.
Yes, I'd like to concur. I'd like to concur with what Griffin just said, because whether we put sidewalks in or not, as you are trying to make turns at that intersection, the vegetation really does hinder sight lines. So if we don't put in sidewalks for 3 or 4 years, by the time the funding gets done and the engineering and all the permitting gets done, we're still going to have a line of sight issue. And so hopefully you will support, as a board, getting this line of sight issue started, and potentially if there are bushes that need to be cut down, they can get cut down. We do support the project of sidewalks going down to the harbor, et cetera, and getting some of that work done. But this is kind of an issue that is now, and it has been here for some time. I know I use that turn many times, all the time during the week, And your car has to be fairly out into 28 before you can even take a crack at seeing if anything is coming. And people do come around, the road curves a bit. So we're hoping that you will support this.
Thank you, Linda. Jerry?
Yeah, regarding the sidewalk, this is something that I'd like to see treated separately, because the sidewalk's going to probably end up being on the south side of Route 28. That's the snow-in roadside. And it seems to me more the line of sight is on the inside in the corner of the corner, which would be the Freeman's Street end of that's where we'd like to see some of the staking going on, and that's on the side where the sidewalk probably isn't going to go. It's something that we could probably get done sooner than later, and then the sidewalk.
Larry?
Yeah, let me, who's,
Ed.
I see,
Ed.
Ed, and then I get to you, Bob. Ed?
Well, it occurs to me that I think everybody's on board with doing the staking. The question comes, how do we fund it? And I'd ask Mr. Powers if there was any funding he saw available.
I think if there is going to be funding, it might be through the administration budget. So I can go through that tomorrow and see if that amount is out there somewhere.
So, and also, given that, eventually we are going to be doing this sidewalk project and having this area as well as the rest of it eventually staked out. I know at town meeting several years ago, we approved an amount of money for that sidewalk effort in the design of it. Which it was approved. If it's still intact, could we use a small portion of the 250,000 to do this bit of staking?
The original appropriation of 250 was returned with several articles last year in balancing the fiscal year 21 budget. We do have, it's in the capital plan for 22, but I think for the small dollar amount that we're talking about,
Okay.
I think there's a professional services line item in administration that I can look at for that appropriation, or excuse me, for that purchase.
Okay. Well, with that, I'd make a motion that we authorize the town administrator to move ahead on securing the staking out using the line item he recommended.
I would second that.
Okay, is a second. Before we vote, I know Bob Nicholson, you had wanted to have a comment.
I just want to say I'm extremely supportive of this. I live 4 houses down. I've been in a number of accidents, not myself, but I've gone in and heard the crashes and gone in, called 911. So I think you're right on target on doing this. And the reason I called in is it's more than just this. It's also the sidewalks. And I just wanted to bring this up because it's brought up in this conversation. I'm very disappointed where you're talking about soft curbs on the sidewalks. If you look in Dennisport, you look in Dennisport on 6A or 6, they have nice granite sidewalks. Those are much more safely defined than they are if they have the soft curbs. So when you start going down those paths, I'd like to really let you focus on that. I think that's a very important issue that you need to consider. So I'm very supportive of the sidewalks too. I don't walk down there, but I'm really worried about somebody getting hit and killed. So, but on this thing, I agree 100%. I think that Snow Wind should be stepping up. They're going to have a lot of traffic coming in from their updated facilities, and I think you should press them on that. And I don't see why they couldn't come up with a few dollars to help you out. So I think it's a good idea to do that. The other thing that I think, Griffin, that you might want to pursue is they come down that road at 40+ miles an hour. So I think that 35-mile-an-hour sign that's on the other side of the hill needs to be changed to 25. And I think I would press the state to do that. And that would be a secondary thing that would help in safety-wise. So those are my 2 points. I think it's all positive. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Don?
Thank you, Larry. I'm going to riff on what Linda and Jerry were talking about, just to make a statement for the public, because they often don't understand this. With the encroachments that you're seeing, it's not a rarity. There's so many people who don't understand that the roads are paved, but they're not paved to the full road layout that the town owns or the state owns. I mean, I can't even get my own neighbors to understand that, but in general, when they're putting hedges up at the edge of the road, it's more than an encroachment. It's a public safety issue, and we should be enforcing, especially in intersections like this, our rights to be able to govern what's at that edge, because it's not their property. It has never been their property.
Thank you for that, Don. If there's no other comments, we have a motion and a second. I'll take a roll call. Ed?
Aye.
Don?
Aye.
Steve?
Aye.
And I'm an aye. So Jerry and Linda, thank you very much, and we'll proceed.
Very welcome.
Thank
We'll see
you.
you next week.
And thank you, gentlemen, for the consideration.
You bet.
Larry?
We'll see you next
Yes.
week at our committee meeting.
Larry?
Pardon?
This
Yes.
is Ed. Before we move on, and I may have been trying to read through the material that Joe sent us on the budget while it was happening, but did we skip over the consent calendar?
No, we
No,
did
that
it.
was taken out of order.
Well, we took that out of order, Ed, so we're okay
Okay.
on that one.
Okay. All right.
It's a good question, because I've been known to skip items in the agenda, so.
I wouldn't have let you do that.
All of a sudden we were on the budget and I saw us having come just from the wastewater presentation.
Right.
So,
No,
okay.
We did it.
Joe, we'll move next to contracts.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you heard, Chair of the Recreation and Youth Commission state earlier tonight, John Mahan, the kudos that he offered really go to the town engineer for the exceptional work he's been doing generally in procurement, but to finally bring this beast known as lighting before the board. So I am recommending, as you can see in the memorandum, that the board approve this. This is a 30B supplies and services. However, it's a cooperative, which allows us to buy directly as the purchaser. The cooperative purchasing group is authorized and recognized by the Commonwealth. This is for the White House Fields lights. It comes in at $332,123. And as you can see, the original article had in excess of that amount. And I recommend that the board approve and execute the contract.
Are there any questions? All right. I think it's well presented with a checklist and also Ed.
Is this include the purchase of the equipment and installation?
It's my understanding that this is purchasing the materials.
Okay.
The original article was insufficient to do the rest. However, Griff, stop me if I'm wrong, but I believe that's where the Harwich Mariners of the Cape Cod Baseball League have stepped up and have offered additional funding to offset costs related to this project. Griff, did I misspeak?
No, you nailed it.
I did make a mistake in the memo, though. We're not looking to purchase lights and road salt. I had a carryover from one of my earlier memos. I apologize for that. But still ask that the board recommend, adopt and execute the contract.
You have to watch that cut and paste.
Exactly.
Yep. If I entertain a motion?
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I move we approve the contract with Musco Sports Lighting LLC for the purchase of lighthouse field lights for $332,123.
There's a second?
Second.
Other discussion? I'll take a roll call. Don?
Aye.
Ed?
Aye.
Steve?
Aye.
And I'm an aye, so we'll be ready for the baseball season then.
Amen.
Except for the players.
Thank you, Griffin. Next on the agenda is the town administrator's report.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, I'll try to be as brief as I possibly can. First, just to let the board and then the general public know that seasonal renewals of liquor licenses, that process will begin in March, and the season starts April 1st, 2021. And just to put it out there to the licensed establishments, please read the material that staff sends out. The ABCC has very strict rules, and we cannot receive the application prior to the month of March. So those will be coming up in the month of March. And then last but certainly no means least, I will be sending materials to the board relative to my recommendations on discipline or any other action related to the hearings held previously on Ember and Port. And Mr. Chairman, as we've discussed, I think we'll be looking at the 16th or the 22nd for that to occur.
Thank you, Joe.
And that concludes my report.
Selectmen's reports. Don?
I don't have anything.
Ed?
Well, I noticed in the administrator's presentation, he one of the items he brought up was the issue of expanding the short-term rental tax from 4% to 6%. I've been over the last couple of weeks, I've been polling the towns, other towns on Cape Cod. And at this point, 11 of the 15 towns have set their short-term rental local option rate at 6%. Of the 11, about a little over half of them have dedicated either the additional 2% or in some cases, all of the short-term rental amount to either assistance in affordable housing or in helping to cover costs of wastewater. I think given our interest in minimizing the impact on local taxpayers, that we ought to look at putting an article on the town meeting warrant to enacting this at some point in the future, allowing enough time for property owners to finish off the current rental season on their existing advertised rates and not having to make a change. Presumably, if you wanted to do that, you'd make it go into effect, say, on January 1st, 2022. But I think we ought to take a serious look at that. Going down the road, we need to develop sources of revenue to help for these expenditures we're being required to make.
Don?
Yeah, I just want to say that's all well and good, but when that was presented to us by the prior town administrator and went down by a 3-2 vote, it was precisely because it was attached to nothing. It was just going to get dumped in to the operating budget as a mechanism to continue to grow in our regular operating, and that's not what this is about. So this is a whole different subject.
We should put it back on to debate this, Larry.
Yep.
Yeah, we can, we'll put that back on because
Tonight.
because I appreciate Ed's comment, Don, yours, that it needs to be directed. People don't want going to the general fund, so there may be a way to help us out.
I agree we should do, I agree we should put it back on to debate it, but at this point, if we do, it'll be for town meeting a year from now because articles have to be in this Friday for this year's town meeting.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
So the Friday deadline of this week is for any citizen-led petitions.
No, it's for all warrants.
No, it
All
isn't.
articles.
No, it isn't.
I don't think so. I think we have a little more time. We can double check that. Steve?
I got nothing.
And I have nothing either, so I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Second, we have a second. I'll take a roll call then. Ed?
Aye.
Don?
Aye.
Steve?
Aye.
And I'm an aye. Thank you and all